This episode of the Boss Builder podcast is brought to you by Wisdom Tree Coaching. If your organization needs coaching for your managers to get them through those hurdles and focus factors, please visit our sponsor, Wisdom Tree Coaching, to check out their options for individual coaching and group and team coaching. They also offer their really popular course, Coaching as a Discipline for Managers. For more information, check them out at wisdomtreecoaching.com, or you can call them at 304-549-4630.
Welcome to this episode of the Boss Builder Podcast, where we talk to great bosses and those who build great bosses about what it takes to be a great boss. And now, here is your host, the founder and CEO of Boss Builders, Mac Monroe.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Boss Builder Podcast, the podcast for those of you who are new to supervision, those of you who are in the role and are struggling with it, and those of you who might even be thinking about going into that role in the near future. You know, a lot of what we talk about on the Boss Builder Podcast has to do with leadership, and today is no exception. Today our guest is Dave Maurer. Dave Maurer is the author of the book Watering Rocks: How to Fail and Succeed as a Leader. Dave's got a really interesting background. He did a number of years as an Army officer. He's got a lot of experience in corporate America. He's got a lot of experience working with transitioning military veterans. And his book gives us a lot of really interesting lessons about what it takes to be a successful leader. In the really fun interview we're going to do, he talks about the title, what the title means. It probably means something very different than what you think. He's also going to share some of what he sees as challenges in the future for leaders, and even talk about one of the leaders he respects most out of his entire career. So with no further delay, let's meet our special guest, Dave Maurer. Dave Maurer, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mac, and thanks for having me on today.
No, this is great. Dave, you've written a book recently. The book is entitled Watering Rocks, and I want to ask you lots of questions about the book. But before we do that, I was wondering if you might be able to share some of your background with our listeners, because you have a really interesting background.
Well, sure. And some of that is, I think, a factor of age more than anything else. But I was a career Army officer, served for 22 years, retired back in 1999, and then started working as a federal government contractor here in the D.C. area, as many of us have done. And I've been very fortunate. I landed on my feet, and I've been able to stay in the world of the military ever since, working with military healthcare systems for a while, and most recently working with military career transition processes, helping our armed forces and their spouses try to be as successful as they can be in their second careers once they separate or retire from the military. So I've been around my folks for a long time. I'm the product of two military members. I've got three boys, two of whom are on active duty in the Army. And as I said, I served for a couple of decades. So it's in my blood, and this gives me a chance to continue to serve.
That's great. Well, the title of your book is Watering Rocks: How to Fail and Succeed as a Leader. Now, where did you come up with that unusual title? And tell us what the book's about.
Well, the title actually stems from a song that I just happened to hear. I think it was called Disneyland by Five for Fighting. And there was a phrase in there that said something along the lines, I woke up and watered the rocks in my head. And it kind of stuck with me for some reason. And I think why it resonated with me is that watering rocks as a kind of a metaphor for me for how so many people who consider themselves good leaders, even great leaders, want to take on some of the more difficult and challenging people in an organization who have perhaps previously not been successful, and claim that, hey, I can use my skills and my abilities and my time, and I can fix that person, and I can turn them into more than they have been. And often that works, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think that I have found over time that we spend sometimes an inordinate amount of time watering rocks, so to speak, trying to make something grow out of the rock when there's nothing there. And that person is just not salvageable. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. And the consequences of that can be serious. If you spend too much time trying to fix something or someone who is broken, in that case, it's often at the expense of good and even wonderful people in your organization. And the good people might wonder, wow, why am I working so hard if I'm not getting any of the attention? And the really good people, the great people, tend to leave because they don't want to be part of an organization that doesn't recognize their efforts. And so that's kind of what I meant by watering rocks. It's kind of a visual for me of don't spend too much time trying to fix something that you can't fix.
No, I love that. I think that's a lot of the traps that some of my audience finds themselves in is they have this heart for people and say, I want to see the potential in them, but you're suggesting that some of them may in fact just not ever turn out and not to devote a lot of time at the expense of your superstars. So thank you for that. Now, the subtitle, it says How to Fail and Succeed as a Leader. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was cautioned by of all folks, my oldest son, who is an active duty Army major, who said, boy, I don't know if you want to put failure in there in that subtitle. And I thought, well, more often than not, we fail before we succeed. So that's the reason I put it in there, because we often learn more from failure, don't we, than from our successes. And even though it's sometimes a painful process, it tends to educate us and provide some fortitude for us as we go forward when we've experienced failure. So I'm sure many of our listeners have had failures in their professional lives that we hopefully learn from and turn into successes. So that's why the subtitle.
That's great. Well, how to fail. I mean, most of us don't need the how to, but it sounds like it's how to survive the failure is where you're going with that.
For some of us, it comes naturally, I'm afraid.
Well, I think for everybody, it is. Some people don't want to own up to it, but I'll own it. I guess you probably would too.
Yeah.
Well, it's nearing the end of the baseball season, and I wanted to ask you about one chapter title that caught my eye. It's 60-42-60, and you use the baseball standings as a metaphor. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, well, I'm a lifelong baseball fan, and particularly a Phillies fan, so life has been challenging for me at times and difficult as a Phillies fan. But one thing that I had noticed, and I don't know if someone else pointed this out to me years ago or it just came across, but if one were to look at the baseball standings at any year, at the end of the year, you'll notice that out of a 162 game season, both the first place and the last place team in that division will have won 60 games. Both the first place and the last place team in that division will have lost 60 games, which is interesting to me because it shows that the difference between first place and last place is only about 25% or so. It's those other 42 games. And it speaks to me in terms of opportunity, and that every game is important. Every encounter that we have in our lives, whether it's professional or personal lives, is important. And you just don't know how important they are until the end of the season, so to speak. So it's a long season to be sure, but the difference between first and last place is only 25% of the time, 25% of the wins, or 25% of the games, I should say. And I think it's a lesson to all of us that every encounter matters. Every encounter should be treated as important and not just passed off as routine.
Okay, no, that's great. That's wise.
I will say, Mac, if excuse the difference this year is that the Orioles, my second favorite team, unfortunately haven't even hit 60 games this year. They've only won 47. So there goes my theory. I might have to change the title of the book. But
in all fairness, they just dumped the manager. So I guess, that's the punishment, right?
So much for watering rocks.
Well, but I mean, couldn't that be another great example? Is that maybe this team is full of rocks and it's time to either replace the rocks or replace the person that carries the water? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, at least your Ravens don't suck too badly. Redskins, I don't know.
Oh, I'm an Eagles fan. I'm still on the high from the Super Bowl, so Well,
we're still on the high here in Middle Tennessee from the beating they took last Sunday, but I guess we shouldn't talk about.
Can we talk about something else now?
Let's talk about something else. Give us a little space here. We don't get to celebrate much here.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, on location now, I'm here in Middle Tennessee. You live in the DC metro area. And so, as anybody who has lived in the area knows, the traffic there is legendary and it's
Hmm.
awful. And so, you would consider yourself a road warrior. And so, making the trip to and from work for you is probably as long as the job. And one of your chapters is called The Drive of the Leader. And you have some interesting input on road signs. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, and fortunately, I'm not forced to make that long trek these days, but I did for a couple of decades. And before that, when I was still on active duty, living in Central Virginia and Northern Virginia, driving up to the Pentagon and other places, so I did become a road warrior, so to speak. And it just occurred to me as I'm making these treks back and forth every day, sometimes 90 minutes or 2 hours each way. As I'm looking at these various road signs, I started to think of them in different terms and maybe use those words and those warnings on the road signs again as a metaphor for our work life. So I started jotting them down and had my wife write them down as we were driving back and forth on longer trips as well. And I think they offer some advice and wisdom if we take the time to look at them. Signs like yield can remind us of the importance to not always having the last word or having to win every argument. Wrong way speaks for itself. I think we can benefit from the caution of not going down the wrong path, certainly blindly in our professional lives. Stay in your lane. I think that's my favorite. We hear this term used a lot. Stay in your lane and do what you do and don't cross over into someone else's lane, so to speak. And that happens, and sometimes it's justified. Often it's not. But we in those on those road signs we have the double yellow line and we have the dash yellow line. So that tells me there are times when it's appropriate to pass and to get in that other lane, but you should get back and stay consistent with what your job requires. There are so many others, speed bumps, fog area, rest area. They all connotate some good advice, I think, for those of us who are in the workforce, that sometimes we need to rest, sometimes we need to recreate. We are often in a foggy area. We don't know what's right or wrong, what's good or bad, what's up or down, and we have to rely on our best judgment, our experience, the advice of others, and sometimes simply how we were raised. We're all going to hit speed bumps, and sometimes we don't recognize a speed bump for what it is. We think it's a wall, and we can't go around it when it's really just a speed bump. I talk about obstacle illusions in the book as well, that so many things that we think are obstacles really are not. We just haven't figured out how to negotiate them yet. And more often than not, I think we need the help of others and counsel from others, whether it's our boss or our colleagues or our family. So that was the genesis of the road sign analogy.
No, that's really, really helpful, and probably a much better use of time sitting in the traffic to be able to reflect on that. But I love the idea of taking some time out, even if it's sitting in traffic, to reflect and kind of just sort of comprehend who am I as a leader and what are some of my challenges. Now, you've got a chapter at the end of your book that is really just a whole bunch of words of wisdom, and I was wondering if you might be able to share a few of your favorites with us.
Well, yeah, and this is, my attempt to kind of capture a lot of other things that really didn't warrant a chapter, but things that I have picked up over the years, and certainly not all my own, but I've stolen liberally from others. I just can't remember all of the authors and or people I've encountered along the way. But I think that they offer, I'll call it words of wisdom. That's generous. But some good advice. And one of my favorites has been to tell the story about Oreos. And I do this often when I speak. And everybody knows about Oreo cookies. Not everybody knows that they are the best-selling cookie in the world. And I've been saying that for a number of years. And I finally looked it up, and I was proven right. Thank goodness. And yet they advertise on television. And I thought, well, why does Oreo cookie advertise on television? You go down the aisle at the store and you see Oreos and you put them in your basket. It's not because you saw them advertised. It's because you know how good they are. And if you're old enough to remember the old packaging that the Nabisco company had, it was all cellophane. and it was noisy and messy. And once you opened that cellophane container of Oreos, you were committed. Boy, you had two choices. You were either going to, find some Tupperware, or you were going to do as I usually did, and that's just eat the whole container. But now they've got a new package, and I think we're all familiar with it, where it's this easy pull, very quiet tab that when you go down to the kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, you can pull that back and nobody can hear you, and you can reach in and get 3 or 4 or 15 cookies and rearrange the rest so nobody can tell you're in there, and close it back up again. And I thought, well, again, Oreo cookies, best-selling cookie in the world, and they innovated and they rebranded. And to me, that says something about what we should be thinking as professionals in the workforce, that there are times when we need to advertise, we need to speak about ourselves, we need to do it with humility, but we still need to be able to tell our own story. And we talk about that when we're talking about career transitions for the military members as well. And we also need to consider when it's time to rebrand and step out of our comfort zone and do something different or do something differently. And as Oreos have done, and that's to repackage yourself. Now, it didn't make the cookie any better. It probably didn't improve sales very much because I don't think they could go any higher. But it met a need for the public, for their consumers. So that was one. There are several others. I've talked about the respecting the organization chart, and very simply, what I mean by that is that we often in an organization we stumble and bumble into one another, and we get in each other's lanes, as I said earlier. And it's not always because people don't like each other or there's animosity or there's confusion necessarily, but sometimes it's because either the organization chart and the system we have established is wrong, and we're following an incorrect org chart, so to speak, and process chart, or it's correct and we're just not following it. It's usually one or the other. And when we have structural problems, that often leads to behavioral problems as well. A mutual friend of ours, you'll remember Dave Gerber taught me that years ago, that so many problems that we face are not personal. They're not even professionally oriented. It's because we're not in the right structure, and that leads to problems down the road. And one other I'll just throw out is I talk, we always talk about, the ladder of success and climbing up your ladder, and use that metaphor a lot. And I guess I've discovered over time that some people might climb that ladder and get to the top of that ladder and then realize that ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. And they got to the top of a game, but not the game that they really wanted to play. And they've lived a whole life, spent a whole career, and achieved success, but it's not in the area that they really, really wanted, though they didn't perhaps recognize that at the time. So I caution folks to make sure that your ladder is leaning against the right wall before you start that long, arduous climb.
No, that's great. Great pieces of advice and great metaphors as well. Well, here's a question that, as you were talking, I thought about, and maybe you can give us an answer with this one. You do work with groups of folks that are transitioning out of the military. And so I'm kind of curious from your perspective, how does leadership inside of the military translate to leadership outside of the military? As just something, because I do have an audience, several of them are in transition. I do some work with the Hiring Our Heroes program up in Clarksville. And I'm just wondering, if they're listening in, what can you recommend just from where you sit?
Well, in terms of leadership, I think there's a direct correlation and translation from what we learn in the military to how we can apply that outside the military in the civilian workforce, whether it's in business or working for yourself or working in a government assignment that's not the military. We're very fortunate as military members and veterans to have been perhaps to the best leadership schools in the world, where you're not only taught the principles of leadership, but you're given ample opportunity to practice what you've learned and to fail before you succeed. I think the notion of responsibility to your next higher authority, of respect for authority, not blind allegiance, but healthy respect for the positions of authority, and doing what you're expected to do, to have responsibility for those in your charge. I mean, nothing is more important as a leader than the responsibility that you're given for those for whom you serve as a servant leader. And you can't take that too lightly, that those people who work for you and look to you as a leader depend on you a great deal, perhaps more than you recognize, and will remember you during their lives while they're climbing their ladder. And, that all that is, do you want to be remembered for the good or the bad as an example or as a warning? Because what we do in terms of our leadership, we did it in the military, we do it now, will have long-lasting consequences for so many people. So you've got to be very careful that you exercise it properly. And I think we're taught that in the military. And I think that's, as I said, that certainly resonates in the civilian workforce as well. Don't abandon what you've learned in the military. Those principles are solid. They're based on solid principles. And though they may be applied a little differently in the civilian marketplace, again, principles are principles, and they tend to work.
That's great. Well, it's interesting. One of my previous guests, Mike Staver, said in his book, as a leader, you're messing with people's lives. And so maybe even a more extreme there. Now, you do have a pretty, I'm not saying that you're old. I'll just say you have a really, really extensive amount of experience. And I wonder if you could think back and maybe and tell us about maybe one leader that either you have personally experienced working with or you've read about or studied that really stands out to you as a great leader.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. And, as one who has lived a while and been in the workforce one way or the other for over 40 years, you can imagine there are several leaders that might come to mind for various reasons, both in the private sector and from my time in the military. I'll tell you one that leaps to mind, and that is a former superintendent at the military academy at West Point. I was privileged to serve on the staff there for a number of years, many years ago before I retired. And my boss's boss then was a guy named Lieutenant General, 3-star General Dan Chrisman. And I hope you won't mind my invoking his name, but he to me stands out as a model leader, and for so many reasons. We don't have time to go into all of the reasons I would choose him as a role model. I'm still in touch with him. He calls me Dave, and I call him Sir. That's how that goes. But General Chrisman, and I mentioned him in my book as well. Now that comes up in a very short chapter called Quiet Leadership, where he just exhibited, without any pomp and circumstance, how a good leader should carry himself or herself in certain situations. And he was a quiet man, still with us, fortunately. He's a quiet man, dignified, brilliant person. But beyond that, he is just a person that you want to be around. And I think that's one of the tenets of good leadership. Do people want to be around you, or do they want to escape your presence? And everybody wanted to be around General Chrisman because he was so welcoming and able to take the time to talk with anybody, no matter how junior they were or how senior they were or how much time he had. He always made time, and still does. I still see him now and again, and he is still the same wonderful, gregarious, fine man that I knew 20 years ago.
No, I love that. I can think of plenty of the people I worked around when we'd see them coming, we'd scatter in the opposite direction. So yeah, that's a pretty good standard. Imagine they still are. Yeah, they certainly are in my world. I can tell you that. Mm-hmm. Well, one more question I have for you, and this is, I want you to kind of reflect back on your journey up to this point, and now as you're looking forward. In your opinion, what do you see as the greatest challenges that leaders might be facing in, let's say, the next 5 years?
Wow, there are many of those, I'm sure, and it's hard to look into the future with too much clarity. But I would say that some of the challenges that leaders face are the workforce itself and remaining relevant as a leader to a younger workforce, dealing with social media and all that it entails, and being able to lead and to capture the attention of those that you lead, while social media and all those other voices are bombarding people and your subordinates and your colleagues with other information that may not be in concert with what you're professing. I think the workforce is getting more and more intelligent and capable. People are smarter, I think, now. Young people are smarter now than they were when I was coming up, and probably before that. At least it appears so. They're certainly technologically savvy, and I think we have to understand how people learn and how people need to be recognized and rewarded and counseled. And it's not one size fits all. I think that's been true through the ages, but certainly going forward to the next 5 years or so, I think it's important that we recognize that everybody is different, and what's good for one, it may not be good for the other. And that's what makes good leaders perhaps more rare than they should be. And that's, you've got to get inside the head of the people that report to you and understand what their trials and tribulations are, what they're facing in life, what they're going through, what floats their boat and what doesn't. Maybe it's a pay raise for one, but it's a seat at the table or a new title for another. And perhaps in the past, many years ago, that wasn't as important. But I think now, with the younger workforce and what they know and how smart they are, we really have to pay more attention to them and less attention to ourselves, and get inside their head so we can help them progress and reward them accordingly, counsel them when they need it so they can be as good as they can be.
Well, that's good. I was really hoping you weren't going to give us gloom and doom, because then I might have just packed up and quit doing what I'm doing. So it sounds like challenging, but maybe just by focusing on relationships, some of this stuff takes care of itself. And I appreciate the input.
Well, I would offer that relationships are the basis for everything that we do in life. There are a lot of people that are smart, a lot of people that are lucky, and people that are lucky and smart. But everything seems to come down to what relationships you've forged over the years, and who you maintain contact with, and who you value as somebody in your circle. And the importance of not only establishing but maintaining those relationships can come back and help you. Also gives you a chance to help them and those in their circle. And I think that's what life's all about.
Oh, I would agree. That's great. Well, Dave, we've really enjoyed having you on the show. Before we let you go, how can people, first of all, buy a copy of your book? And secondly, how can my audience engage you to come out and maybe speak at their event or be a resource for them?
Well, thanks for that opportunity. I'd love to be able to come out and do some training or keynotes if folks would find that interesting. My website is www.davemaurerconsulting.com. That's DAVEMAURER consulting.com. And you can also reach me by phone at 540-845-1618. And I'd love to hear from you and get your impressions of the book and hopefully come out and meet you and your audience.
That's great. Well, Dave, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us today, and best of luck as you push forward in your many endeavors.
My pleasure, Mac. Thanks again for the opportunity, and good luck to you as well.
Well, again, thank you so much to our guest, Dave Maurer, again, the author of Watering Rocks, How to Fail and Succeed as a Leader. Again, please reach out to Dave. He's a great guy. DaveMaurerConsulting.com to contact him and also get a copy of his book. Here at Boss Builders, we pride ourselves on the resources that we have to help you, the newly promoted boss, the boss who's in the role and is really struggling. Those of you who are looking to get into the role, resources, of course, done through your organization. We offer actually 3 new offerings now. The first is something we've had for a while, which is our on-site workshops. One of our certified facilitators comes to your site and will actually go through 4 solid days of material, which can be broken up any way you like, of how to be a great boss. Second thing we offer is our famous Boss Builder Academy, which is our video-driven series with the accompanying roundtables. And we've also just recently reached an agreement where we can now license our materials so that you can have your internal trainers actually teach the Boss Builder materials, helping bosses become better bosses with your own trainers on site. For more information on how to do that, of course, contact us at 931-221-2988, or you can reach us always and get more information at thebossbuilders.com. Until the next time we meet, get out there, boss up, and boss on. Goodbye.
You've been listening to another episode of the Boss Builder Podcast with Mac Monroe. To get more information on being a great boss, visit us online at thebossbuilders.com or at Mac's blog, macmonroe.com. Until next time, get out there and be a great boss.